Today, at the beginning of this day, we will present the results of the survey, the research we've done as the part of the Intellectual Output 1, State of the Play on the Use of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education Institutions in the field of Library and Information Science. My colleagues Kristina, Feldvari, Sabina, Rako, and I, Milijana, Mičunović, will say something about the survey, about the methodology, the results, and some key findings that we identified in this research, in the results. And afterwards, we hope we will have a short but sweet discussion about the results and maybe your view of the things we will talk about today, this morning. Okay, so I think we can start if everyone agrees. So Intellectual Output 1 was carried out from the March 1st till September the 7th this year. And our main goal, our main focus was determining the state of the play of the use of open educational resources at higher education institutions in the field of library and information science. There were many researches that were done about open educational resources so far at higher education institutions, but our research is focused both on digital education, open educational resources, and institutional support at library and information science field. So the goal of this intellectual output, or the goals, we have different goals, is to use these results and these key findings to determine, first of all, to actually promote, enrich, and improve. I'm sorry, is everything technically okay? The presentation is okay. Okay, we see. Yeah. Okay, so the goal of this intellectual output is to use the results and the key findings to, first of all, promote, enrich, and improve the use of open educational resources, both in general in education, but mostly in crisis situations such as global pandemic of COVID-19. Then to provide a sort of basis for creating different frameworks for proper adoption of open educational resources. So sometimes we need a standardized approach in different institutions as much as possible, of course, depending on different subjects and courses taught at institutions, to enable also further advocacy and capacity building in regards to open educational resources and open education movement. So we were trying to comprehend the use of open educational resources as a part of open education movement and open access to education. And altogether, these goals, they led us to the final goal, and that is to take the full advantage of digital education and open educational resources in achieving equitable quality education for all. So as an introduction, before we go to the survey design, our two main focuses were on digital education and open educational resources. So I will give just short definitions. Digital education refers to innovative use of digital tools and practices and technologies for teaching, learning, and training, both in the context of fully online classes and also in hybrid or blended learning. Open educational resources, OERs, as we refer to them throughout the report, refer to digital and other materials used for teaching, learning, training that are part or either of public domain or that have been published under open licensing, Creative Commons or other, and that provide free and open use of these materials. So these concepts, of course, are not new. They have been a part of educational ecosystem for some time now, but they have been emphasized more during the pandemic. And because teachers and students had to adapt very fast, sometimes we really needed to rely on open educational resources that are already available. What we noticed and what some outcomes have suggested is that there is the increase in the use of digital tools, online resources and open educational resources. And also what we've found out that there were some modifications, smaller or larger, depending on the institution, regarding the didactics and the methodology of teaching and training. Actually, COVID-19 pandemic brought quite a huge disruption, not just in traveling, as we all see now, but in the education system especially. It changed the educational landscape. And it challenged the higher education institutions in regards to their infrastructure, programs, curricula, teaching and learning process, and also administration, because we had to organize all the things so they can work properly. And along with all these challenges, the pandemic also created some opportunities for the higher education institutions, so they could incorporate and adopt open education resources and digital educations in a more creative, sustainable, and comprehensive way. Of course, there were benefits, there were challenges. The benefits apply both to students and teachers, trainers, and in terms of cost effectiveness, they also apply to the institutions themselves. So we wanted to identify what were these challenges, what were the opportunities, what were the good things, what were the bad things. So we conducted a questionnaire-based exploratory research with the aim to question heads of the departments of library and information science schools and departments, because they had the best insight into things that we wanted to research in this intellectual output, and they could provide us with the insight into their policies and practices they've been applying during COVID-19 pandemic. Also, we wanted to include not just the heads of the institutions, but of course they were supplying answers, but we wanted to cover the field of library information science and academic libraries, because we think that librarians and information scientists as professionals and advocates of open education resources and open education movement and open access should be specially included in this type of research. And now I will say something about the survey design. Afterwards, we will say a few words about the methodology itself. So the aim of this survey was to identify state of the play regarding the implementation of digital education and open educational resources, of course, in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, especially in the field of library and information science. And this is something that is specifically attributed to this type of research. So there were several also additional aims that we wanted to cover with this research, and that is to expand the awareness on the role of the importance of open educational resources for higher education, which is actually shown in the results that there is a certain lack of the awareness of open educational resources and their importance for higher education. We wanted to use these results and the report to incentivize the creation of different higher education policies and strategies to support the development and use of open education resources, both in general and during crisis situations, because our firm belief is that open education resources is not just an emergency tool to be used during crisis situations, but something that should be incorporated in education beyond crisis. And it is something that is the future of education. We also wanted to incentivize the adoption of open education resources in the LIS field, in the library and information science field, especially in the areas where they are mostly overlooked and not used. Also, we wanted to gain insight into different ways and opportunities how to enhance the use of high quality open education resources, because sometimes we see that, especially during crisis situations, different practices emerge as an emergency tool, but maybe they are not the best tool to be used as a standardized approach or a system or a tool. So we wanted to see how we can evaluate, verify open education resources that were created during the pandemic, so they can become high quality tools in higher education beyond the crisis. And also we wanted to contribute with all our efforts to the future of higher education in general and in crisis situations in particular. The questionnaire consisted of 3 parts. And the first issue was digital education. The second issue was open education resources themselves. And the third issue was institutional support provided during COVID-19 pandemic, especially to the staff, to the teachers, and to the trainers, but also to students. Survey design was done by the IO1 team, Intellectual Output 1 team, of course, with the support of all the other teams, because we had several stages. We had the first drafting of the questions, then we had the proofreading, readjustment of the questions, then again we had the final proofreading, then we had the pre-testing, readjusting, and then the final stage of implementing the survey. The survey was uploaded online, sorry, but at this part of the methodology I will leave to my colleague Kristina, who will say more about it. We contacted heads of the list departments and schools. We used our networks, so we tried to approach them more personally. And we invited them to participate in the research. We sent them the letters of invitation to participate. And the survey was active from June the 1st till September the 1st, so for 3 months. And we applied purposive, that is judgmental sampling. So the question was designed to be answered specifically by heads of the LIS departments and schools. Altogether, we had 56 departments who participated, 56 representatives. We had, I think, 68 answers, but they were not fully answered, so they couldn't be accepted. They came from 23 countries, and altogether, because I'm not good with numbers, I will read, we have 1,839 teachers, 25,978 students, and 305 study programs covered by this research. So now we will say something more about the methodology and then the results.
Yes. Thank you, Milijana. Well, Milijana said something about survey design, but before survey design, we conducted an integrative literature review, and it was conducted to advance the theoretical framework around the issues of digital education and open educational resources, and also to build a firm theoretical foundation for advancing knowledge on digital education and open educational resources in time of crisis as the COVID pandemic. So the first part of literature review was related to seeking and reviewing distance learning instruction and recommendations for higher education institutions at the time of the COVID pandemic, given by the European Commission and European Union. And also all recommendations to higher education institutions related to teaching in Croatia were also reviewed. We took documents published on the websites of the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education, and also on the websites of universities where LIS schools are located, and also faculties and LIS departments. And in the end, we made additional summary in English for each document. At the second part of the literature review, we focused on critical approach and synthesis of the body of the knowledge on the digital education and open educational resources presented in books related to digital education, online education, and educational technologies, also in books related to open educational and open educational resources, reports and case studies, reports and case studies about digital education and open educational resources implementation, also reports on the digital education policies, and reports on open educational resources policies. The survey, Milijana said something about the survey, but I will say something about methodology, how we made the survey online. So we created the survey using the Lime survey, and it was active from June the 1st till September the 1st. It had 3 sets of questions, 38 questions in total, referring to the issues of the implementation of the digital education during COVID pandemic, the implementation and modes of use of open education during COVID pandemic, and institutional support provided to least schools or departments in regards to both digital education and open educational resources during COVID pandemic. Also, the survey was designed, as Milijana said, to be answered by heads or directors of least schools or departments. We received answers from 56 least schools from 22 countries, and statistical analysis was performed with Oer software, and descriptive statistic was used to quantitative descriptive data sets. So the results will be shown by my colleague Sabina.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you, Kristina. We will continue with the results. So the survey contained different elements of digital education and open educational resources implementation at higher education institution during COVID-19 pandemic. We put focus in today's presentation only on several of them, just to give you a good foundation for further discussion and perhaps even some concrete actions that could be implemented after this results presentation. The representatives of LIS schools and department were asked which aspects of digital education are being implemented during COVID-19 pandemic. As we can see from the results, top 3 aspects of digital education that were implemented were live teaching sessions via platforms like Zoom, Big Blue Button, Jitsi, MS Teams, and similar platforms. At 94.6% of LIS schools department, this was the case. Online communication with students was implemented at 95% of LIS schools department that actually participated in this survey, and online examination and new ways of assessment and evaluation of students' work also was highly adopted at LIS schools and departments during COVID-19 pandemic. Also, the participants, respondents were provided with definition of digital education. So we use a definition that already Milijana mentioned in the introduction. That definition was developed by Institute for Academic Development at the University of Edinburgh. So those are 3 elements that are very important. Regarding digital education techniques and strategies, we can see that at LIS schools departments during COVID-19 pandemic, blended learning was used at 80% of LIS schools departments. Also, what is very encouraging to see that project-based learning and problem-based learning as effective ways of teaching and learning were used during pandemic-19. At 73% of LIS schools departments, project-based learning is used, and 71% of LIS schools departments, problem-based learning was used as a technique and learning strategy. One important thing to notice here that several LIS schools department virtual reality education and augmented reality education was used. We think that this is the future, and perhaps in the future we will see some more examples of quality use of virtual reality and augmented reality education. Those examples identified here in the survey can surely serve as a starting point. And regarding digital education tools, we can see that at all LIS schools department that participated in this survey, video conferencing tools were used, then learning management system. And also what is interesting to notice that online plagiarism detection systems were used at LIS schools department during COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that it's very important to monitor academic integrity even during times of crisis, even during COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a good thing that LIS schools department implemented also online plagiarism and detection systems. When we talk about digital education resources, we can see that all of LIS schools department implemented or used digital learning materials, also electronic textbooks. Since this survey was focused on open educational resources, we can see that 52% of LIS schools department used open educational resources. Also, the participants were provided with a definition of OER, so we can be sure that they all understood what the term means. The definition was used by UNESCO. We also in this project use definition of OER that is developed by UNESCO. When implementing digital education, it's very important to find a way to resolve students' problems regarding digital education. So we asked representatives of LIS schools department how do they approach and handle students' problems and issues regarding digital education. We can see that they provide regular online consultation and live online Q&A sessions. The most at 88% of LIS schools department, we can see that practice. At 73% of LIS schools departments, there is some kind of technical support or video tutorials that help students adapt to unfamiliar technology. Also, representatives of LIS schools departments stated that they use proprietary software and free and open online software, I will say almost equally. So we don't see that proprietary software is dominant or that online software is dominant at LIS schools department. We can see that that kind of software is used equally, almost equally at the LIS schools department. Also, representatives of LIS schools department identified Zoom and MS Teams as mostly used proprietary software at their institution, and Moodle as a dominant free and online source software, open source software used at LIS schools departments. It's very important that tools and practices are aligned. That is even more important during crisis and like COVID-19 is. Representatives of LIS schools department were asked, do existing systems, tools and practices provide enough help and support in ensuring the continuity and quality of classes and activities during COVID-19 pandemic? We can see that most of the LIS schools representatives said that yes, they worked very well and they worked as integrated systems. That is the case in 66% of LIS schools department. But still at 27% of LIS schools department representatives said that yes, they worked, but still there are, but all tools, system and practices did not work very well together, and each created some kind of discrepancy in the system at the institutional level. And at 16% of LIS schools department that participated in this survey, they stated that no, the tools and practices were not aligned So they had to acquire or develop additional tools, systems, or implement some additional practices in their everyday practice. As Milijana said, collaboration between LIS schools, departments, and academic library is very important. But what happens during pandemic and COVID-19 pandemic? We can see that even during pandemic, at 80% of LIS schools, department students were able to obtain necessary library materials. So it's a good thing that that students were able actually to have materials useful for their learning. Also, library provided virtual information services for students, and students were able to obtain library materials during library closures at 59% of LIS schools departments. Also, digital education could be implemented on different level, on institutional level, university level, school, department, or even it could be a responsibility of an individual teacher. As we can see from the results at LIS schools department, implementation of digital education is ensured mostly at institutional university level. At 73% of LIS schools department participated in this survey stated that. But also we can notice that at 41% of LIS schools department, implementation of digital education is a decision and responsibility of an individual teacher. So everything is on teacher to be to responsible and to decide about how to implement digital education. Also, it's very important to monitor and evaluate procedures in digital education. But during COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that 48 LIS schools department out of 56 that were covered in this survey actually monitored and evaluated procedures of digital education. And how did they do that? They monitor and evaluate online teaching and learning. Students' learning outcomes were also monitored and evaluated, students' participation and teachers' performance. So those four elements were monitored and evaluated the most during pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic at LIS schools departments. What about OER repositories? We all know that OER repositories are very important when sharing open educational resources. So we can see that we asked representatives of LIS schools department, do they have institutional repository that have a collection of OERs included? And we can see that 45% of LIS schools department stated that they have collection of OERs in their institutional repository. At in some countries, there is also national repositories of OERs and even domain-specific repository related to library, information science, open educational resources. But still, we can see that lots of representatives of LIS schools department are not familiar with the information if their institutional repository contains open educational resources, or even if at their national level there is some kind of open educational resources or open OER repositories implemented. So there is a place for this project to contribute to spreading the word about openness, open education resources, and importance of that aspect. Also, OER implementation should be encouraged, should be encouraged, yes. So we asked representatives of LIS schools department, are there any incentives at their institution or at national level for developing and implementing OERs during COVID-19 pandemic? As we can see from the results, at 52% of the LIS schools department, the creation and implementation of OERs is the results of an engaged individual. It's not a strategic approach, is not institutional effort to actually encourage OER implementation. So still there is a place for this project and other projects to contribute in developing policies and procedures for OER implementation. When creation, adaptation, and management of OERs is implemented, then we can see that at 30% of LIS schools department use free and open source software for creation, adaptation, and management of OERs. At 21% of LIS schools department, proprietary software is used. We mentioned documents and procedure frameworks as important things. So we asked LIS schools department which of the documents or procedure frameworks does their LIS school department have. We can see that recommendation regarding the continued conduction of university classes and activities during COVID-19 pandemic at institutional level is mostly present, to be precise, at 68% of LIS schools department. There are several policies, recommendations also implemented. But what is noticeable and what is important to see, that at some institution there are policy documents or procedure frameworks related to data privacy, confidentiality, and security practices implemented at 46 of LIS schools department. That it's very important aspects of digital education, and it's very encouraging to see that 46 LIS schools department have a policy document related to privacy, confidentiality, and security practices. But we can also notice that when regarding open educational research, there are still a small number of policy documents. You can see from these results that only 21% of LIS school department have policy documents or procedures frameworks for OER in general at institutional level. So there is a place, and those documents could serve as a starting point for development other policies document at other LIS schools departments institutions. Also, support for teaching staff is very important during pandemic and COVID-19 pandemic, even more important. So we asked representatives what type of practical support does their institution, university, faculty, school department provide for teaching staff during COVID-19 pandemic. As dominant, dominant type of support was online training regarding the development of digital skills. At 93% of LIS schools department, this support was implemented. Also, service desk or help desk as in-house technical support was implemented at 79% of LIS schools department. Also, 20% of LIS schools department had some financial incentives during COVID-19 pandemic. So that's all regarding results from this stage. I will give the word to Milijana to actually summarize everything in key findings.
Thank you. Okay, so these survey results have given us an insight into some current practices and policies at higher education institutions regarding digital education and open education resources. So I will go through these key findings step by step and maybe say a few words about each finding. So the first thing is that what we found that during COVID-19 pandemic, there were different aspects of digital education that were almost equally implemented, except digital credentials. Yeah. And the two most dominant aspects of digital educations that were implemented during COVID-19 pandemic were live teaching sessions via video conferencing tools, as Sabina already mentioned, and online communication with students. So as I already said, digital education and open education resources is not something that emerged in this pandemic, but it is the educational strategy that is already present in our educational ecosystem. Sometimes when we say online communications, teaching and training staff may have some reservations regarding this type of communication because they prefer traditional face-to-face communication and interaction with the students. But if we apply different communicational strategies and techniques, then we can ensure both professionalism, proper communication, respectfulness, support from each side, and this can lead to quite quality communication between students and teachers, which has proven to be a crucial part of the teaching process in the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, it can positively impact students' motivation for studying. It can provide them with a better understanding of the subject they're studying, and it can enhance their productivity overall. Also, regarding the digital credential systems, it is quite evident that different schools and departments will need to improve their digital credential systems, both at the policy and programmatic level, not just for this pandemic, but probably for the future of education. The second key finding says blended learning has proven to be the most used digital education technique strategy, along with the project-based learning and problem-based learning that were also significantly present. They all create what we say overall inclusive digital learning environment, a setting for equalized learning opportunities. And this is quite important in crisis situations where some groups, vulnerable groups of students may have problems with accessibility to education or where there are issues with availability of the education in general. Virtual reality and a blended learning as augmented learning, as Sabina already said, were the least used digital education techniques and strategies during COVID-19 pandemic, but we believe this may be so because at the beginning they need more investing in time, in resources, in skills. And when you're overwhelmed with the crisis itself, it's very hard to find time and resources to provide for this type of implementing new types of education. But of course, they are the future of education. So again, informative decision-making about these techniques and strategies is very necessary for all institutions. Also, all library and information science schools and departments used video conferencing tools, while majority also used learning management system and online plagiarism detection system. So these were the most used systems. Repositories, online quizzes, and social media were also significantly represented. This is something that we offered to them so they could choose these systems. Some of them suggested the systems they use by themselves that were not on the list, but they were mostly covered by this. So video conferencing, repositories, online quizzes, plagiarism detection systems. Some tools and systems have been integrated, like video conferencing tools have been a part of learning management systems. And some departments used specific tools that were provided by their institutions that were bought as a proprietary software. And this is what we identified as a problem, because when something is bought, you haven't bought it yourself and the institution provides for it. Most of them don't think of it as a proprietary software. So there's this lack of the awareness of the distinction between proprietary software and free and open source software. Also, some departments, some schools use their own specifically developed tools and systems which were mostly free and open source software. Especially in the crisis situation and the management of crisis situations, higher education institutions should actually deliberately choose tools and systems so they could provide for a more coherence, more consistency, more quality educations. Because if we leave to every teacher training to pick it for themselves, then we can have quite discrepancy in the use of tools and systems which can again provide additional problems for the educational system. Also, what we saw is that all library and information science schools and departments used digital learning materials, while about 50% of them used digital open educational resources. Digital learning materials are of course, very important part of online education in general, and they can become a great supplement for the online curriculum materials. They can include different types of materials, not just open educational resources, but different types of resources and materials that can be openly licensed. So from different tools and multimedia to e-textbooks, they can quite literally be very similar to the classical textbooks that we use in the classroom. They can, these digital learning materials can positively affect the teaching and learning process. And they can enhance the teaching and learning approaches that we use. Mostly important in the crisis situations because we can see, and I think we all testify to it, that students had more autonomy in the learning. And again, they were feeling more isolated, as we saw. This was the big problem. We mentioned it yesterday. So autonomy in learning, in the combination with this feeling of isolation and being left on your own to do all the work, can be quite overwhelming for the students. So providing them with quality digital learning materials can help in this regard. Almost all of the LIS schools and departments implemented new didactics in their teaching. So what we see here that most of them used online live sessions. This contributed to synchronous setting of education. Again, they used different platforms for knowledge sharing, information sharing, which contributed to a synchronous setting of the educational system, and both are important. We sometimes think that only live sessions are important, but this asynchronous setting can also be helpful for students when they're doing the work autonomously, when they work on their own, so they can always have access to information and to materials. Also, in regards to didactics, there were some different innovations in didactic models that were implemented during the pandemic that changed the teaching and the learning process. And what emerged almost as a pattern is the combination of different teaching and learning modalities that best support this active learner-centered approach in education that was really the main model during this pandemic. Then we have you'll see there are a couple of slides like this. Most of these schools departments successfully found the ways to address students' problems, so they handled it quite successfully, and issues regarding digital education. They did it either through regular consultations, live sessions, communication, or providing technical support to students. So again, synchronous and asynchronous support was very important. And in this regard, both the teacher and the technical staff had a crucial role in this support to the students. Also, digital platforms and tools used during COVID-19 pandemic fostered the adaptation of current or even the development of new curricula in more than half of the LIS schools that we researched. As we already mentioned, COVID-19 pandemic made quite a disruption. It modified learning strategies, it modified teaching strategies, it created many challenges both for teachers and students, because we both worked autonomously from home. So this led to different types of curricula innovations. Teachers and trainers had to be very creative in this sense. And this was quite successfully handled, but what also emerged as an issue is that we need to link this issue of didactics to the development of digital competencies, both in regards to digital education, but also as learning outcomes that are linked to digital competencies. So developing digital competencies and applying it to the learning outcomes in the certain subject. Then again, we have most of the teaching. I'm now lost because we have this list of the. Yes, most of the teaching staff had the option of customization of the teaching and learning process. This is also quite important to be able to, because the dynamics of the pandemic, of every crisis situation, is such that it can be quite overwhelming, and then we have to act in the moment. So having the flexibility and the freedom to adjust your subject and the teaching approach, as well for students to adjust their learning approach, is a very important issue in regards to the teaching and learning during crisis situations. In regards to the software used, as Sabina said, many of the Lee schools departments use proprietary software, especially Zoom, MS Teams, but many of them also used open source software, especially Moodle, even though they don't have the awareness of Moodle as an open source. And almost a quarter of respondents used locally developed software. Well, the integration of this educational technology during COVID-19 pandemic has become very essential for enabling the continuity and the quality of education. So different tools, different applications, different systems, platforms, resources were used. And for many, using the open source systems and free and open source software was also an issue of cost effectiveness, because now they had, in the pandemic, they had to use all their funds for mitigating health risks, adjusting the spaces in the classroom. So they didn't have enough funds to maybe buy some additional systems, software, tools. So in this regards, open source software and tools and systems could be of great help. Also, most of the Lee schools departments used existing systems and tools and practices during COVID-19 pandemic, but in some cases they were proven to be in mutual discrepancy, or they were proven to be inadequate altogether. So acquiring some or developing some additional tools, system and practices can be quite an additional, not just cost, but stress, both for the technical staff and for the teaching staff, in terms of time and organization. And in order to facilitate a more successful implementation of digital education tools and systems, we think that higher education institutions themselves, as well as the governmental bodies. So we cannot just leave everything to institutions. Governmental bodies also should be included. They will need to invest in the infrastructure more. They need a more informed planning, strategic planning, and not just investing in infrastructure, but also in reskilling or upskilling of the staff, so they can be more familiar with the new tools and systems they maybe suddenly need to use during the crisis. Okay. Now we come to the issue of academic libraries. Academic libraries had a crucial role during COVID-19 pandemic. They were either a provider of necessary teaching and learning materials, both through libraries spaces and through repositories, or a provider of virtual information services. Sometimes in higher education or educational institutions, sometimes we have this prevalence of content over method. And when we face some challenging, dynamic new situation, this can be quite a problem, because now we have to apply some new methods, and we are more concentrated on the content. In this regard, academic libraries have proven very successful in handling these changes. They found new ways to approach the existing services. They found new innovative designs in creating new services and adopting new practices in delivering these services. So it's not just adjusting the service, but how to deliver this service to the patrons. Again, what we saw is that libraries have proven to be the cornerstone of higher education. Not just in general, but especially during crisis situations. They were really flexible, they could adapt very easily, and they had a great ability in leveraging the services and skills, so they can provide services to the existing patrons, but what was most important for the new incoming students that were really overwhelmed because they were facing this pandemic studying ecosystem. They haven't met their teachers, they didn't experience studying fully in a classical way. So libraries were really crucial to provide them this sense of being a student, being in the library, studying with the library materials, preparing for the courses, for the examinations and such. In most cases, the implementation of digital education was ensured at institutional level, but in more than a third of the cases, it was also decision and responsibility of the individual teacher. So as we said in the report, institutional support is something we cannot go without. It is a sine qua non. Sometimes the lack of it can put additional pressure to the teaching staff, and teachers, even when they're stressed, they still have to be motivated to work. They still need to be knowledgeable in how to use digital tools and how to use new systems, how to use new strategies. So investing in the reskilling and upskilling of the teaching staff is thus a very important issue for the higher education institutions, not just for this crisis situation or the ones that are coming. I don't want to be a bad prophet, but probably we have to assume, but for the changes in education in general. Also, most of the list schools, departments carried out monitoring and evaluation procedures of digital education. This is a very important thing because through monitoring and evaluation, we can define indicators of success, and we can apply them further to different tools, different strategies, different approaches. And this is important for the future planning and improvement of education, of different programs existing and the ones that are about to be developed and implemented. These were the main key findings referring to digital education. Then we identified, of course, different key findings referring to open educational resources. So some of them are that a majority of library information schools and departments stated that there is either no national repository of open educational resources in their country, or that they are not familiar with the information, which was very significant to us. The same applies to repositories of library information science open educational resources. And the situation is a bit different with institutional repositories, which is, of course, quite understandable, that contain the collection of open educational resources, where almost half of the list schools departments state that they have such repositories. So this information showed us that list community needs to be more encouraged, more incentivized to produce and to use open educational resources, or even not just to use new educational resources, but to use existing teaching materials, which most of the teachers and trainers have. They use them inside of the Moodle or some different learning management system. They can use these teaching materials and maybe publish them under open license. and then provide them as some sort of open education resource. Because publicly available repositories of open educational resources are not important for institutions, for trainers, teachers, and students, but also for stakeholders and decision makers, because they have the insight of what is happening. They can get more familiar with the matter, and this can then improve their decision making in regards to the funding, incentivizing open educational resources, or even finding different economical, societal, cultural models that will support further development of open education resources and open education in general. Okay, I think we can. Also, regarding to OERs, is the key finding is that creating and implementing open educational resources was often the result of an engaged individual, the teacher, the trainer, though in some cases there were specific governmental measures and incentives or projects with public funding, like DECriS or some other project. Having a specific governmental or institutional policy or additional funding or whatever support can and actively included different stakeholders can incentivize, they can increase the production of open education resources and their adoption. Engaged individuals, they may be okay for the as a first step, but they also can get quite overwhelmed, especially if the crisis situation is prolonged. So sometimes the solution could be to establish, we propose actually two maybe steps, two solutions. First is to create a framework for design and adoption of open education resources. Of course, we have to take into consideration the specific subject, specific course, specific school, and also to establish professional networks of teachers and trainers that design, that use open educational resources, so they can share experiences, they can share models, or even this could lead to the peer production of open education resources, which is also a step further. More than half of list schools and departments didn't use open educational resources during COVID-19 pandemic, and this was quite indicative to us. The reasons vary from lack of resources, lack of support or incentives, to even arguments such as that it's mostly decision of an individual teacher, so we don't want to do it collectively, everyone can choose by themselves what they will do, or that they already use different teaching materials in Moodle, as we mentioned before. Most of these reasons stem from the lacking of awareness about the concept of educational resources and the lack of the awareness on their impact on higher education in general and in crisis situations, and how they can change higher education. So it mostly stems from that. And this is why one of our main goals is to raise the awareness of open educational resources. There are different ways to motivate higher education institutions in general and list school departments in particular to adopt, design, and author open education resources. And I will read just some of them. There was a proposed list. I will read some of them that were mostly chosen and some that were suggested by the respondents themselves. So what they say, what would incentivize them and motivate them more is actually creating the awareness of what open educational resources are, because even in the responses we sometimes had, I'm not familiar, I'm not sure what the open educational resource stands for. Also providing teaching staff with more time, resources, and flexibility. Recognizing and rewarding teachers for their work, especially on open educational resources. So maybe some specified financial incentives and some specified different kinds of incentives. Also providing necessary funding and bonuses for teachers who create and implement open educational resources. So it's not everything about the bonuses, like financial bonuses, but maybe providing them with additional tools, computers, infrastructure, providing them with more time. For instance, if you're working on an open educational resources, maybe to download their engagement in other activities. Also creating policies and providing infrastructure. What we saw there sometimes is a lack of policies, the main problem for the lack of the awareness and the use and the adoption of open educational resources, or even making it, this was very funny, making it an obligation. So really having it like an institutional order. You should make open educational resources, or you should use open educational resources. Whatever the approach, whatever the incentive and motivation, we think that it is important to be aware that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. We have to take in consideration different types of institutions, different subjects, different matters, different courses. And this is why the adoption of open education resources and the creation of them must be the result of informed planning and also strategic development. So it can't just be, okay, we have a problem, let's do something about it. This is a good first step, but then after some time, we should do some more informed planning and strategic development. Okay. In general, also a small number of LIS schools and departments used open educational resources during the pandemic. Existing teaching materials were often used as open educational resources, especially those that were already apart. I think, did I say this? Yeah, then we can go. Yeah, it's really hard because there are many of them. When developing and creating or adapting open educational resources, the staff usually does it independently, as a department, as a school, as a faculty. So what I said before about the peer production, we don't see it much. So it's mostly an individual effort and independent effort. And more than 2/3 of LIS schools departments have no institutional policy regarding the development of open education resources. So this lack of institutional policy is both the reason for and also the result of the lack of awareness of open educational resources, how to use them, how to create them, how to evaluate them, how to verify them. Flexible teaching and learning, open education and knowledge sharing, distance education and resource-based learning, effective and quality teaching and learning were amongst some of the most common reasons for developing, creating, adapting, or implementing open educational resources during COVID-19 pandemic. So despite this, we can say overall poor adoption of open educational resources, certainly schools and departments said that still use them. Some of them used existing ones, some of them developed their own, and they have actually recognized valid reasons why to adopt open educational resources. There was still a number of LIS schools departments that don't ensure peer reviews for open educational resources. So even those that use open education resources, they don't apply peer review. Ensuring peer review is very important because one of the main arguments usually against open educational resources is actually the lack of peer review, which can affect the quality and efficiency of the open educational resources. So to ensure their further implementation and the use, we really need to establish a more thorough system for peer reviewing the open educational resources. And there is a sort of, if we go through, when Kristina mentioned, talked about the methodology and all the case studies and research reports and books that we went through, what we saw is there is slow but steady increase in the peer review of open educational resources. Yet the problem is that the evaluation is mostly done by the teacher who is using them. So there isn't a system provided that can do it systemically, thoroughly, coherently. So we need to focus more on that. The curation and management of open educational resources was usually done by the teacher who created it or them, or by the academic library. So again, we go back to the issue of individual responsibility. And this can be one of the major reasons why teachers just didn't use them, because of the lack of time, problems with the organization, the lack of infrastructure. And if it's only their responsibility, they just couldn't handle it. So that could be the main reason why teaching staff decided against the creation or the use of open educational resources. They were those that used them sometimes said they were solely responsible for all the phases of using open educational resources. So from planning, designing, creating, using or searching, finding existing open educational resources, promoting, evaluating, it was all on them. So it was quite overwhelming. So they decided just it is too much. Yet in those cases that when the teaching staff did decide to use them, they mentioned that academic library and academic library staff was of great support in doing these things. Also, more than half of the open educational resources created within the institution, the school department, were creating using open source software. It is crucial to use tools and systems and platforms that allow collaboration. When we talk about open educational resources, open education, collaboration, cooperation are crucial. Even peer production, which wasn't a buzzword in these reports that we went through, but peer production is also quite important. So using tools and systems that enable free and use or reuse of the resources is quite important in this regard. Most of the open education resources created within the institution were published under open license. So open licensing should actually be an imperative. It shouldn't be just, we found a few institutions published under open license. This should actually be an imperative when it comes, especially when it comes to publicly funded materials, resources, and if they come from publicly funded projects. Those that chose open licensing framework sometimes independ which open licensing framework they used, and that influenced how they will use open educational resources. But what we saw is that most of the respondents didn't recognize Creative Commons as an open license, which was quite surprising to us. Besides, of course, open licensing, which is quite important, we think that open standards, open formats are also quite important issue in creating open educational resources. The role of academic library in the creation and the use of open educational resources during COVID-19 pandemic refers mostly to providing library materials for planning, designing and creating open educational resources, and in some cases providing infrastructure or having library staff involved in the creation of open educational resources. So libraries haven't just proved themselves to be the cornerstones of higher education during pandemic in general, but they were really crucial in creating open educational resources, either, as I said, through providing materials, designing and creating open education resources, providing infrastructure, having their staff directly involved in the creation, or even being a partner or a project leader in creating open education resources. The roles were different. So this indicated to us that both at the institutional level and governmental level, there should be more recognition on the importance of library staff, library professionals, information scientists and their role in the creation of open educational resources. And also additional funding should go in that sense to the libraries, and also both institutions and governmental bodies should do more about the reskilling, upskilling of the library staff in the sense of the creation and use and adoption of open educational resources. As for the promotion of open educational resources, we found out that only half of these schools, departments that use open educational resources also promote and share them, while most of them didn't monitor or evaluate the use of open educational resources. Of course, there should be a greater focus on promotion of sharing of existing open educational resources, because this is the first step to raising general awareness of these resources, and promoting and sharing usually also again applies additional obligations to the teaching and the training staff. So maybe this should be done more at the institutional level. And of course, the lack of monitoring and evaluation, which was shown through this research and the results that we discussed before, this may have a negative impact on the future development and use of open educational resources. So, because data gathered through monitoring and evaluation, they can provide direct insight into situation, and they can provide directions for further development and how to improve the resources, both at policy and programmatic level. As for institutional support during COVID-19 pandemic was mostly provided through different recommendations and policy documents and procedures frameworks. Still, there was, as we said, there was still a lack of policy documents and procedure frameworks regarding open educational resources in most of the institutions that participated in this research. The reason, as I said before, this is also the reason and the consequence of the lack of the awareness of open educational resources and their impact on higher education. So this tells us that we need more in-depth analysis of open educational resources policies, incentives, and how to implement them in higher education. And lastly, the final key finding is that practical support for the teaching staff during COVID-19 pandemic came mostly in the form of online training, technical support, and provided access to software and digital tools. Teachers and trainers, especially in crisis situations, they take different roles, many different roles, multiple roles, in order to, it's time. They have different roles in order to successfully navigate through this Corona teaching, as we call it, and it puts additional pressure on them. So providing them with training, technical support, or even time to reflect on what is happening can be of great help to them. These are key findings, and maybe we can leave our ending thoughts and conclusion for the discussion. So maybe we can start with the question, or do we do a break now and the discussion later? Discussion. Okay. So maybe we can do the discussion and maybe then go through our ending thoughts. If there may be some questions from the audience here or on Zoom.
Gemma Santos, University of Barcelona.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. Good morning. This is really interesting. And I was thinking that, for example, I'm participating in a survey also in academic libraries with Spark Europe, and we are analyzing the results, and they are very, very similar. I was comparing all the time, and I wonder if you can have like more information about policies. I'm not sure if you have like an open field that they could give like more information, because I'm curious to know if they have policies, standalone policies of open education, or if they are part of a bigger global policy, or if they have a strategy but no policy or a strategic plan. Because, for example, in our survey, we asked about this, and we were surprised that they have like more components of open education in global policies, more than standalone policies. I don't know if in this case, in this survey, you could find out this, or
we have we didn't mention it now, but we also asked the participants of this research to provide us with links to the documents, policies, whatever they're using. So we have them all listed we will have them all listed in the final report. Actually, we have now the draft of the final report. We guess that the final report will be ready at the beginning of December. It will be published on the DECriS platform, freely to use, of course, open education, open access. So whatever they said, we put as a link. Sabina knows, yeah, we put it as a link at the end of the report. So we have this list of links to different documents, strategies, policies that they are referring to. Of course, as you said, most of them are at the global level. A very small number of institutions has developed their own policies regarding open education or open education resources. And this is what we said, this is the main problem, because then the teaching staff, the trainer staff, they don't know where to turn first. So you have to have some kind of document, you have to have some kind of framework, some guideline, how to do it, what should you do. It's even for the libraries, because libraries can have some sort of autonomy in the higher education, but then again, they also need some guidelines, some framework. And if there is a lack of it, of course, then we cannot talk about the proper adoption of digital education or open education resources of whatever type of tools, modalities, strategies, approaches. So yes, we will have this ready, this list, but as I recall and remember, Sabina can correct me if I'm wrong, they're mostly referred to some type of global policies. Only a small number of them have their own at the institutional level policy that they developed in regards to open education resources.
Okay, thank you. I would like to add like something else that now came to my mind. In our survey, there were 2,034 answers from academic libraries around Europe, from 24 countries. And there was something, well, successful or some good news that, for example, there were, I think 20% they have a policy, which is less that you show, because you, in your survey, you obtained like 34%, I think. But they were saying that they have a policy under development and also under consideration. So finally, the 20% increased a little bit more, like more than 30%, 34, 40. So this is also a good thing. They are thinking about developing new policies. So there is like something, is some kind of movement in institutions, in higher education institutions, after the pandemic, and also maybe because of the Oer UNESCO recommendations, that something is changing, and this is some good news. For example, it was one of our results. So it will be nice to know a little bit more, to do like more analysis, deep analysis, and also we could exchange also information between the surveys, because as you were saying, you have the links of these policies, and we have also 27 links to different policies. So it will be nice to compare, because maybe there are synergies, or maybe there are new ones that we didn't know between us, so we can collaborate in this as well. I will ask, of course, Spark Europe, but I'm sure they will be interested. Thank you very much.
In regards to that, there were some suggestions in different reports that we should develop not only repositories of open educational resources, but repositories of research and case studies on open educational resources, and they should be publicly available to all, to higher education institutions, to academic libraries, to stakeholders, decision makers, policy makers. And this is the network that I was talking about. If we are all doing it by ourselves, then yeah.
I have a question. This is Juan Jabote from University of Barcelona. I have a question with two parts. You have said that open educational resources need to be a peer review. The question is, which sort of peer review? Open peer review or closed peer review? And in addition, if it's so, these peer reviewers should be from the same institution of the creator or external reviewers of that. And this is my question. Thank you.
So I will go from the end, from the second one. I think it should be, I believe in, when it comes to open education, open access and free and open source software, I believe in the community and I believe in networks. So I think that it should be done in a way that maybe some sort of a panel, a group of peer reviewers who will be from the institution, but also from other institutions. This is my opinion. And in regards to the first one, this is a dilemma that I have, even not regarding just to open educational resources, but to review process in general. Should it be open or closed? I'm usually for open, but if we are doing the open review, it has to be also informed, planned, a true system. So it's like a bulletproof, because usually when you say open, people think, oh, it's not the same quality. You cannot be sure of the quality of. So I think we need to find a model that is bulletproof. So we can say, this is open, but it works. And I think if we talk about open educational resources, open education, then we should stick to the word of open as our main guideline in all we do. I don't know, this is my opinion. Maybe Professor Tatiana has something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, if you don't mind. You have said that some institutions have developed some open educational resources by themselves. But do you have information if they use open software or private software? Do you have information on that?
Did they use proprietary software for developing their own software? If we ask them that, I don't think we asked them that. It was. Did they use? So when they were developing their own specific tools, did they use proprietary software or did they use open source software? When developing OER? No, they used, no, this is when they use proprietary, this is what it means. They use proprietary and they used open source. But when they developed their specific tool, this was the question, when they developed their own tools, did they use proprietary software or did they use, we didn't go that far. We didn't ask them that.
Okay, thank you.
But this is also, yeah, we can go in depth very, yeah.
Hi, I am the student. I have a question about the work of teacher that make this open education resource. For the teacher, this is a time that you need to make and all this. I know, so I think that your evaluation, like a teacher, is measured with the research. So you get your curriculum is better when you make more research. So no, you are a teacher, but also research. And you talk about mechanism to engage the teachers. They need to have some benefits of this work. What type of mechanism or system you will design for this? So that the teacher do this work is also recognized in the curriculum, like a teacher, not a research. This is some mechanism or some idea how to handle this, because then the teacher use this time, because okay, I'm a researcher, but also a teacher. So this is my question. Are some idea of how do this?
I don't know if I got it right, but I'll try to answer. If I didn't answer, you then ask me again, or maybe Sabina and Kristina can.
I'm not sure. Did you ask how to motivate the professors to use? Yeah, well, I think that we should make.
I think it's more like when you have to reach tenure or research evaluation is very well considered in order to promote in your place of work, in order to get more funding for your activities. If you want to be a full professor, for instance, research publications are more important than open education resources you do. So the question is possible to shift this balance or to balance these two areas?
Okay, well, I will answer with my point of view. So during the pandemic, I was more involved in scientific research than I was paying attention to this online education because I had more time to do that. But when we shift to the online teaching, I was obligatory in some way to use the Moodle, to use the Big Blue button. They had a Big Blue button to do the online teaching. So that because we were obligatory, then I had to do that. So I had to shift my time to do the online teaching. But if that was not obligatory, I wouldn't do that. I suppose I wouldn't do that. Then I would spread my time to do scientific research. So maybe the motivation should be on obligatory, I don't know, maybe institution. It would be good to institution to say you have to do that, because then most of the teacher will take their time to do that, maybe not just to use the Big Blue button, but to spread their time to work on their skills to use OERs or something else in online teaching.
It's a matter of balance, carrot and sticks.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think the institution, but also at governmental level.
Yeah.
Because the institution can say you can do it, but if it is not recognized, what you said, if we have to do this work, we have to publish in peer-reviewed journals and Quadrilla 1 and whatever, then if nobody evaluates, and we can maybe publish 10 quality open educational resources that are really used, reused, shared, adapted somewhere else, and nobody recognizes it, then nobody will do it, because you need to advance, you need to do the things that count. And until we make open educational resources count, then we cannot really talk about open education and open educational resources. We can romanticize about how good it would be to have open access, open education, but until we have it at the institutional and governmental level supported, and teachers incentivize, what we said, not just financially, but really recognize their work, and this matters, and this is for your research and scientific career, then I think we cannot talk about true open education.
We have a comment from the University of Sofia. This is Tania Todorova. Thank you for your systematic presentation of the year's one results to the colleagues from the University of Osijek. I think that one of the inputs from the participation of the survey is that together with the focus on the question itself, we, University of Library Studies and Information Technology, Sofia, Bulgaria, started discussions about creation or translation adaptation of years for LIS specialties in Bulgarian. I am convinced that the survey and the project DECriS will stimulate the language variety of existing OERs in LIS field soon. This is a comment from Tanya.
I have a kind of more comment than the question. Pardon? Tatjana Paracijelušić, yes. First of all, a title of the report says that we have been doing this kind of research to provide state of the play of the use of OERs at European HACE during higher education during COVID-19 pandemic. This is true, but I think that we have to add the subtitle, which says with the stress on LIS, to be on the safe side. Why I'm saying so? Because you covered in your research, you covered many things which are at the university levels, like a policies or national level, like a policy document, recommendations, and so. So it goes for all, for everyone. But when you go deeper, you're focused on LIS in particular. And when I'm thinking of Europe in this case, it seems to me that, not it seems to me, it is a fact that we have been trying almost 30 years, to my knowledge, to get the European LIS community together in a very firm network. Several attempts happened and we failed. So at the moment, we have the situation that we have Bobcats, which is focused mostly on the organization of yearly conference with students and teachers, which is really great and we appreciate it very much. But Bobcats doesn't have strength to do this kind of recommendations or guidelines. From the other side, as the field is very wide, we have ACIST European chapter, which is focused more on research, and how to build the research community. And the third one is actually iSchools movement. So we are kind of disintegrated or distributed in several different associations. And when it comes to things like how to improve something which it was already mentioned that the library in our field, the library and information science, the library proved to be one of the very important factor or participants in bringing up the new novelty, the new approaches. The libraries are very active and they not only follow, they foreseen what is happening, but they don't have such a high influence on the policymakers. So the departments in a kind of ideal situation, the departments of schools at European level which are called different names, as we all know, must find a way, in my opinion, to act together, to produce such reports, which are very important, but to find a way how to influence the policymakers. Because I'm sure that our at national levels, universities are very mostly big organizations which change very slowly, and many of the leading persons are not aware of the digital education at all, the necessity or the reality, so to say. Yeah. I remember several years ago in Croatia, we had this situation that we have to measure our working time in teaching. So you can spend so many hours per week in lecturing, or having workshops, or having seminars, or exercises. And then we introduced the online teaching, and it was a shock. They didn't know what to do with this, how to measure it. Yeah? And we said, no, but we are doing this, and this is the part of our working hours. So having this in mind, I know that it's very, very difficult to persuade them to accept the changes in the environment, and that they themselves have to change. Take just one more sentence. Take, for example, the structure of the university administration and management. You have the, I don't know, vice rector or vice dean for teaching, vice rector or vice dean for research, vice rector for, I don't know, international relations and so. But this is for, in my view, this is obsolete nowadays. We have to find another structure. We have to find the problem-based structure at the universities or faculties level, to allow them to think about the changes in the environment, and to be proactive, not to accept us or take us as someone who is always complaining and saying we need this and we need. They should be aware that as the leaders of the universities, that something had to be done yesterday, not today. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. I agree. And I think that time is a very crucial factor, because also as we see, despite the pandemic, so beyond that, we see education systems changing very rapidly. And as I say in one course, technological changes are going so fast nowadays. There were always changes, but now they're going so fast that we have less time to reflect, to plan, to inform ourselves. And even in the pandemic and crisis situation, this gets less time. We have even less time to plan, to inform, and to do some strategic planning. And so I think that, yeah, this is really, really a big challenge today. But I don't know, I have a question, even to myself and to everyone. I remembered while we were discussing, I don't know if I remember correct, but for the Croatia, some years ago, there were guidelines or recommendations for using open source software in higher education. If I remember, there were some sort of guidelines. But if we see today, after so many years, even the LibreOffice, there is no LibreOffice for the students, and we expect our students to have proprietary software for everything they do. Why should they? If we don't provide for it, especially in the pandemic situations, when there are more vulnerable groups, or more inequality in access to education or in access to tools and systems, still we don't provide them with alternatives. So I don't know what to do. How can we, if there are recommendations and guidelines, they still don't work.
In my humble opinion, I think that sometimes these kind of recommendations are made just to fulfill the obligation to do so. And then no one is looking what is happening with this. This is like when you have the law, let's say the Act on Libraries or whatsoever. So everything is fine on the paper and so, but no one is watching. Is this really taken in reality? Do they do what is for them? What is the law? What is prescribed? So this is with this. I think in one moment, at least in Croatia, they come to probably SRCE or Carnet influence them and said you have to have this, and so they did it, but no, with no. I would dare to say with not full appreciation or understanding what's going on. This is critique, but yeah, I know, but